If world history had a Netflix category, the Middle Ages would be the one tagged obscure, reruns, no electricity required. People call it the Dark Ages, not because knights liked wearing black, but because a bunch of Renaissance scholars decided those centuries needed a makeover. Cue dramatic music, and now, medieval times. Let's set the stage. The Western Roman Empire just crashed in 476 AD, and Europe was basically left without its cosmic Wi-Fi. Rome's roads were still there, but the brain power, and maybe the routers, weren't. Imagine losing your grandma's brand new smartphone, but losing the phone book to her favorite callers too. That's what happened to all the records and knowledge. They mostly went, whoops, spoiler, we're hiding in monasteries. For a few centuries, scribes in hooded robes were basically libraries on legs, carrying entire archives by candlelight. If you needed news, you'd have to track down a monk and ask politely. Town gossip traveled no faster than a horse's trot. So was it all gloom? Of course not. But the story is complicated. Renaissance peeps in the 14th century looked back and exclaimed, "Oh my stars, the Middle Ages were so dark." They weren't talking light bulbs. They meant dark as in we didn't have that Renaissance glow up yet. They dug up the term from Latin, something like saeculum obscurum, courtesy of an Italian scholar who wanted to describe the period about 400 years after Constantine. It stuck. Printed on a t-shirt next to a castle, and no one would blame you. But hold your jousting lances. Even during the so-called Dark Ages, life was vibrant and weird in its own way. Yes, there were plagues that made rats pop up on road charts like Mario mushrooms. And yes, knights thought heavy armor was a great fashion statement, practical, stylish, and maybe the original heavy metal wardrobe. But there were also flashes of brilliance. The Middle Ages invented cool stuff like mechanical clocks, the original time show on medieval cable, windmills before hipsters made them ironic, and universities, places where the original students actually read books because Netflix hadn't been invented. By the way, not all the lights were actually off. Sure, wheat fields got dark when storms blew through, and evenings needed lamplight because Netflix hadn't been invented. Yes, they played chess. Some call it the medieval console. But knowledge? It wasn't all hidden under a rock. It was sometimes just on pause. Monks were the keepers of secrets, like scholarly wizards transcribing Pliny and Plato, while occasionally doodling marginalia of knights jousting chickens. Outside Europe, the world was busy inventing everything from algebra to flying carpets, while Europeans had just discovered the joys of stirrups. Talk about lagging behind tech trends. Now imagine an internet glitch where all your news apps crash. People still gossip, but now they're doing it in town squares over mead. Without printers, a blacksmith might treat every town crier speech like the morning newsletter. It was kind of like that, but message boards were physically bound in leather. Trending topics? Let's just say #HarvestFail and #CrusadeWatch. If Wikipedia existed, their featured articles would be Harvest Fails or Crusade Chronicles. And Google's only autosuggest would be, did you mean plague? So sure, from a certain 18th century Parisian perspective, Europe's Middle Ages looked like a 400-year-long power outage in the library wing. But calling it dark made for good drama. Nothing sells history like a little mystery and gloom. What about nighttime? People slept by the stars, occasionally chased by boars, and not on fancy memory foam mattresses. High medieval fashion was practical, wool tunics and chainmail. No, broadband was a bolt of expensive cloth or maybe a falcon. If you wanted news, you'd hitch a horse, not dial Wi-Fi. But at least it was drama. Crown claims, peasant revolts, epic quests, and seriously weird torture devices. If you think modern reality TV is wild, try giving up dramatic feudal family feuds for your nightly entertainment. Medieval charades, the stakes were permanent. And why the burn? Because basically, history from the Renaissance onward loves a good redemption story. Once we were in the dark, now we are enlightened. They were so smitten with their fancy marble statues and sundials that they made the Middle Ages sound like a horror flick trailer. The truth? While plagues and wars were nasty, the Middle Ages also laid foundations. Gothic cathedrals? Check. Universities like Oxford and Paris? Check. Kings and queens who kept diaries? The original social media? Check. So in the end, dark may be a bit unfair, or at least sold by hype. Next time someone asks, why do we call the Middle Ages the Dark Ages, you can tell them, because the history folks needed a catchy name for Europe's version of a drama thriller where everybody thought the lights were out, but actually, there were plenty of candles. One thing's for sure, the Middle Ages might have been a long, cloudy season, but they also had fireworks. And yes, their beloved manuscripts were illuminated, decorated with gold and color to literally light up a dark room. Literally. Chinese fireworks arrived, along with stage plays. The first theater buffs were cheering long before Shakespeare. They had universities. Yes, they had midterm exams and frescoes too, and knights with more armor than a robot cat. Not exactly dull. They even gave us epic tales, Dante's Inferno and Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Talk about literature lighting up the centuries. 1,000 years later, history buffs still debate if it was dark or just heavily filtered Instagram. Regardless, it's not a boring textbook chapter. It's more like a plot twist you didn't expect. More dramatic than a vampire soap opera, and way more mud. So yeah, the Dark Ages? Maybe more like the early Middle Ages and its complicated playlist. Because history isn't black and white, it's got a sepia filter. And like that one classic film you can't stop watching, the Middle Ages keep popping up in new Netflix shows, games, and memes. In fact, medieval history has never been more popular. With fantasy shows like The Witcher and games like Elden Ring, it's like those ages never left us. Thanks for tuning in to our very own historical stream. If you enjoyed this episode of History Channeling Satirical Vibes, hit like and subscribe, or face the plague of boredom. After all, we prefer our history with Wi-Fi. And by the way, the Renaissance sequel came in full HD color. And hey, remember, as a 1,000-year-long storyline goes, maybe we should be calling it The Middle Ages, an ongoing epic. Stay lit out there. And one final truth. History's best stories come from these so-called Dark Ages, so don't let the lights go out on your curiosity.